Dr. Will Tuttle. He is a pianist, as you may have surmised, a composer, educator, and author of the acclaimed book, The World Peace Diet. He is a recipient of the Peace Abbey's Courage of Conscience Award, and he co-founded the Circle of Compassion Ministry. He has been a happy, healthy vegan since 1980. He is a Dharma master in the Zen tradition and has created 7 CD albums of uplifting original piano music, and let me tell you, they are fabulous. That was my first purchase at an animal rights conference, actually, and I still have it. I love it. Although it burned onto my iPod now that it's the day of the technological thing to do. Will has performed and lectured widely throughout North America and Europe, and he currently travels full-time with his spouse Madeline in their solar-powered RV, presenting over 150 lectures, retreats, workshops, and concerts a year. Please give it up for Dr. Will Tuttle.
All right, it's great to be here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the animal rights movement, and really, I think, try to bring a perspective of how old it is. And I think that's something that we easily lose sight of when we just sort of see the horrible things that are happening to animals and try to do something to stop that, but to realize that this has been going on a long time. And I think all of us in this room share a few things, essentially. We care about animals, and we're doing what we can to find out more on how we can stop the suffering of animals. But I think underlying that is we're all questioning the underlying story, the official story of the culture. The official story of the culture is that animals are put here for us to use, and that's fine, to use however we want, to kill, to confine, hyper-confine, mutilate, and eat, and so forth. And so the underlying essential thing is to question the underlying official story of this culture. And so I think what I'd like to do is go back and see how long this has been going and what people have been doing to try to question the official story of this culture. There's a lot of official stories that need to be questioned, right? I mean, if you don't eat meat, dairy, and eggs, you'll probably die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. Right? A few other ones here. Animals don't have a soul. The World Trade Center towers were destroyed by Arab terrorists. U.S. foreign policy is to promote freedom and democracy throughout the world. So these are a few other false official stories. But anyway, the thing I want to emphasize is that according to anthropologists, around 8,000 to 10,000 years ago in Iraq, for the first time, people started to own animals for food, herding animals. And this was the last great revolution that our culture ever experienced. And I think it just changed everything. Animals went, it was essentially a revolution of reductionism where animals were reduced from being respected cohabitants of the world with us to being property. And from that, it led to war. A wealthy elite class emerged that owned livestock, which was wealth. The fastest way for them to get rich quick was to go to war against another wealthy elite, and if they won the war, they would get the livestock. We had the beginning of slavery. We had the beginning of the domination of women. The very first word for war on this planet is the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, which means literally the desire for more cows. That's the first word for war. So we have to see that this culture developed science. The first science was basically men figuring out how they could dominate animals and women more effectively, especially animals to get babies and offspring that would have more meat, more milk, and more fur. And so this culture created a role model, especially for boys, of a hard, tough, disconnected male capable of violence and cruelty towards animals and towards fellow herders. And this culture spread throughout the Mediterranean, spread eventually, it was very bellicose, spread eventually to Europe, and it kept spreading. And this is the culture that we were born into. It's a culture that has as its living core the routine brutality of animals, primarily for food, but for whatever else it wants. And so, the good thing is, I think, is that we all know at a essential level, this is against our core nature. And from the very beginning, there were people who were resisting this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this. There was the doctrine, or the idea of ahimsa, which means essentially nonviolence. Mahavir, the founder of Jainism, Shakyamuni Buddha, the founder of Buddhist tradition, both of them were preaching and practicing a meatless diet, requiring their students to observe strict codes of conduct that prohibited them from owning animals, harming animals, and eating animals. Both of these traditions, the Jain tradition in particular, emphasized that 2,500 years ago, in the beginning, actually we started writing these things down, that it went much earlier than that even. So these are the first animal rights activists that we know about, who were actually basing their activism on ahimsa, which is a lived sense of compassion for all living beings, and promoting that and trying to spread that throughout the culture in an active and real way. The violence towards other sentient beings is not only unethical, they taught, but it brings suffering to them, but also it inevitably brings suffering and bondage to the perpetrators as well. Ahimsa is the essence of veganism, which is the commitment to minimize cruelty and exploitation by not interfering with animals at all, allowing them to live their lives in sovereignty in nature. And it's important to understand that owning animals as property to be killed and eaten is the hidden and defining core of this culture, and that it is the indoctrinated practice of the mentality of domination, exclusion, reductionism, elitism, and disconnectedness that is required by the food practices of this culture. These sages of India, with the propagation of ahimsa, were rejecting and boycotting the core of the culture of that time. And the interesting thing is that this was part of what is called the axial age by Karl Jaspers. He found, and I think we know this, that there were other people at the same time that were coming to similar conclusions. And some of them are Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Socrates in the Mediterranean, Zoroaster in Persia, Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu in China, Isaiah and the later prophets in the Levant. And so all of these spiritual teachers were emphasizing compassion to all living beings, and the rejection of animal sacrifices, and the fact that violence towards these animals always boomerangs as violence towards us humans as well. As we sow, we will reap. And these ideas spread throughout the Mediterranean. By the time the Christian era started, basically 2,000 years ago, there were already Buddhist centers as far to the west as England, as far to the east as China, as far to the south as Africa, and they were spreading these ideas. And so it's not surprising that with all of the cross-pollination of these ideas in the ancient world, Jesus and his disciples were well known, according to many of the ancient historians, to be abstainers from animal flesh. And it's documented that the first early Christian fathers were vegetarian and most likely vegans. A few centuries later, when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine, the practice of vegetarianism, if anyone was strictly condemned, if anyone was refusing to eat meat, Constantine's soldiers would torture them to death. So this is the attitude that the church adopted, and it continued in the centuries after that, after the fall of Rome, with the brutal suppression of the Bogomils, the Cathars, and other sects that were in favor of compassion for animals being exterminated. And however, there were other strands and individuals that were also promoting nonviolence throughout the medieval period, and they were in the Neoplatonists, the Hermetic, the Sufi, the Judaic, and the Christian tradition. So these strands have been woven through all the way from the ancient time. With the Renaissance and the subsequent Enlightenment in the 16th to 18th centuries, the influence of the church waned as reason and modern science began to ascend. But unfortunately, this was not good news for animals, and signaled the beginning of a much more ferocious exploitation of them for scientific experimentation, as well as for entertainment, clothing, products, and of course, for food. While there had been some modicum of respect and protection of animals as God's creatures under the old order, under the new materialism, they were reduced to mere resources and commodities in the clutches of a surging industrialism and population expansion of omnivorous humans that continues unabated to this day and is threatening all life on this planet, not only for animals but for humans as well. The cross currents of the intercultural dialogue have always served to help people question the official story, and in the 19th and 20th centuries, we saw this happen in the striking rebirth of vegetarianism and animal protection, inspired to a great degree by the rediscovery of Eastern thought in Europe and North America, as the ancient texts, the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Tao Te Ching, and other books were translated. And people began to see, actually, that there were whole populations of people who were healthy, living in basically vegetarian or vegan diets throughout the world. And so in 1850, the old word Pythagoreanism was replaced by the new word vegetarianism, and influenced a lot of people. You probably know some of these people: Shelley, Byron, Shaw, Schiller, Schopenhauer, Emerson, Alcott, Besant, Blavatsky, Tolstoy, Gandhi, and many others. There was also a Christian strand as well, with several church leaders such as William Cowherd in England and his protege in America, William Metcalf, great names, advocating compassion for animals, with some like Ellen White of the Seventh-day Adventists and Charles Earl Fillmore of the Unity School of Christianity, advocating the main tenets of veganism 40 years before the word was invented. And they were aided in this by the pioneering work of the early vegetarian proponents like Graham, Post, and Kellogg, who raised consciousness about the health benefits of plant-based eating, as well as the animal cruelty involved, and also by the efforts of the first animal protection societies, the RSPCA, the ASPCA, and the Humane Society. And then in 1944, Donald Watson in England strengthened the foundation of the modern animal rights movement by coining the word vegan and founding the Vegan Society in London, directly challenging the official story. And he created this word vegan, and he said, veganism is a philosophy and way of life which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practical, all forms of cruelty to animals and exploitation of animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. So this really, I think, is the heart and soul of the animal rights movement. It's this yearning to live our life to minimize the cruelty we're causing animals for any reason at all. Groups and individuals have been working in the decades since, and there have been many books, there's been many studies written, organizations founded, periodicals founded, documentaries filmed, websites created as part of our effort to reduce our violence towards animals. Veganism and animal rights issues are becoming increasingly mainstream as a result of these efforts, and the momentum continues to build in spite of enormous resistance by all the institutions in our culture, and in spite of the difficulties in responding to the pervasive cultural hostility and complexity of the issues involved. For example, it is increasingly clear today that our violence towards animals is a primary driving force behind environmental devastation, physical and psychological illness, war, hunger, inequity, social violence, and besides being ethically wrong. So groups and individuals are aligning themselves with and promoting the animal rights agenda for varying combinations of these factors depending on their predilections, and so there are a number of competing perspectives. And besides this, there's emerged a tendency, especially on the part of the larger organizations, to engage in campaigns that attempt to engage with and influence animal abuse industries to get them to reduce the cruelty of their practices. These campaigns, while they may be financially successful for the organizations by encouraging generous contributions that lead to what are proclaimed as victories for the enslaved animals involved, run the risk of ultimately and ironically perhaps harming the movement for many reasons, such as the fact that the animal industries have enormous power, and it's very easy for them to turn these apparent defeats into de facto victories. We often lose the moral high ground when we argue over, for example, what animal foods, what type of slaughter is more humane than another, and that consumers are more likely to consume more animal foods and products when they are assured that they are humane. This has led to the current state of our movement in many ways being co-opted by the industries. And so, in sum, we live in a culture that has as its core this official story that the complete domination of the animals is the essence of our culture, and that everyone is indoctrinated into this from birth, when we question this, we become part of an ancient tradition and an ongoing effort to liberate animals, which is the essence of both animal rights, ahimsa, and veganism, and that the vegan movement, which is another more proactive name for the animal rights movement, is a movement of complete cultural transformation. And in this, it is different from the other justice and liberation movements. We live at a time of immense and growing crisis that gives us an unprecedented opportunity. The old complacency is being stripped away by these crises, and we're finding that more and more people are realizing that the only viable future for humanity is a vegan future. Rather than negotiating with the suppliers of animal cruelty, we can see from the wisdom of those who have gone before us that the real power we have is in reducing the demand for animal foods and products by raising consciousness and educating and encouraging people to reduce and eliminate animal-sourced foods and products. Thankfully, we see this happening today with the proliferation of both secular, national, international, regional, and grassroots groups and efforts to spread vegan ideals. Also on the spiritual groups as well that are doing this as well. So this is the way forward. The idea of ahimsa and the idea of veganism are so powerful because they resonate with the core of our true nature as beings of love, awareness, creativity, sensitivity, and compassion. Donald Watson and the other sages that have gone before us planted a seed deep into the core of the obsolete story that has mired and encrusted our culture and that threatens to destroy all life on this planet. As we each water that seed and plant our own seeds, a new garden of compassion will grow that will inevitably break the bonds of violence and enslave all of us. People will realize that as we've enslaved animals, we have enslaved ourselves. The vegan revolution, the animal rights revolution, has been coming for a long time now. We are entering the final stages of its realization, and it is a revolution of benevolence, joy, and creative celebration, and it needs all of us. So plug in, join in this noble and ancient work, and together we can transform our culture. Liberating animals, we can liberate ourselves and allow the earth to heal for our children and for the children of all living beings. The pull of the future is stronger than the push of the past. May all beings be free. Thank you all so much for the effort you're doing. Thank you all so much.